now like to introduce you to Pat. Pat is the Executive Director of OCL in New York. At OCL, people with a disability used to live in group homes. Now they live in their own place and are working and doing their own thing in the community. Pat will explain why it's important not to have fixed ideas, learning how to ask the right questions, and what it means to put the power of home in the hands of the person who will live there.
All right, I'm supposed to be talking about home today, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization, and then I'm going to bring you through a few stories of a couple of folks. I gave you a brief snippet of a person by the name of Colin yesterday, and I apologize for doing that so quickly, but you know, what I'm trying to show through this presentation today is that home is really what it means to each person, and each person's home and each person's life is very different. Thank you. OCL is a small agency in central New York State, where everybody asks what New York is. I'm about 8 hours, maybe 8-hour drive from New York City. So New York State is kind of a big state. We're between Buffalo and Albany, if anybody knows anything about New York State. We're in a straight line along the thruway. So we're a small individualized agency there. What I should say is that when I first came to OCL, we were not an individualized agency. We were running some traditional group homes. And actually, I'm going to do a presentation later on after this on some of the organizational change piece. But we were, at that point, trying to do services for people in smaller group homes, but they were still group homes. One of the major things that we've done as an organization is we've separated housing from services. And when I've done residential services for a long, long time and helped people with living arrangements, and typically the agency had the homes in the agency's names. What we did about 20 years ago is we made a decision that all homes would be separate from the services would be separate from the housing. So each person in our agency has a separate budget. So they have a separate budget for housing, they have a separate budget for support services. So we have no legal authority over anyone's home. So we are a residential agency. We do help people with their homes, but we have no legal authority. People, they choose the community they want to live in. They choose the neighborhood they want to be in. They choose if they want to live in the country, in the city, in an apartment complex, if they want a swimming pool, if they want a garden, if they want pets. It's all their choices. So every individual situation will look different than someone else's. Each home is either owned by the person, and we have, I don't even know how many, probably about 12 people that actually own their own home. If people don't own their own home, sometimes families have purchased homes for their sons or daughters, and some of their homes may be in trust for their son or daughter. And then some people don't want the home ownership piece, and so they're very happy with renting. So if they are renting, they rent the home in their own name. Now, I should say, when I talk about some of this stuff, it may sound like we support people with a lot of skills that are able to effectively sign legal documents in terms of legible signatures and that sort of thing. The primary people that we support in our agency are people that other agencies did not want to support. So we have a lot of people with 24-hour support needs. We have a lot of people that may not be seen as being capable of signing leases or legal agreements, but people do. People sign their own leases, they own their own homes, they have their own mortgages, and things are in trust for them. And people are, I think the big thing in our agency is that people are citizens of their community, and this is a discussion I keep having with our state government. You know, I think our state government really thinks about people as being clients of a system. You know, when you think about people being clients of a system, then you have service systems set up. When you think of people being citizens of a community, then it's more natural that you help people have lives, homes, relationships, you know, situations that make sense for them in terms of people. So the heart tells us what's important, and I think that's what we're trying to get with each person. It's like, what is it that makes people tick? What makes it important for you to have the life that you want? And home is a really important piece. I mean, all of us have jobs, all of us have social lives, but home is where we can be who we are. You know, we can relax there, we can do things that nobody else ever sees, we can have disagreements with people, we can walk around in our underwear, we can do whatever we want there, you know? So we need to figure out what's important in each person's life. And most people want personal self-control. They want direction. And a lot of times, as we've gone through this journey in helping people, you know, people have learned, or families have learned, what the system has to offer. You know, so the system has to offer certain types of residential alternatives. But when you really begin to ask questions in terms of, where do you want to live? You know, what kind of home do you want? What kind of people do you want to live with? What relationships do you really have? You know, you're helping people to have some more personal control. You're helping people to have some more direction on where they're going. People want to belong. I can give you an example of just me. I lived in a college town. You know, I went to college in this town called Cortland. And when I was there, I was well connected. You know, I was very well connected. I had lots of students that, you know, I hung out with, and we used to go down to the local pub and movie theaters and all kinds of different things, you know. But then what happened is that I graduated from college, and then I left. And then I came back about a year and a half to that same community. And in that community was still the same pub, still the same restaurants, still the same, Elks clubs, all the different things that were there. But the difference was I was alone. I didn't have all those social connections at that point. And when you think about being alone in a situation like that, it's not the same to go out to a pub all by yourself. I mean, maybe some people like to do that, but, it's just not the same. It's more fun when you go down there with a group of friends, And so when you reflect about what happens to people with disabilities, that happens all the time. People get plopped into something. And, I'd had it was one of the nicest apartments I've ever had. It was just a wonderful apartment. But yet, I didn't belong yet. I didn't have those connections that helped me to belong. I didn't have neighbor connections. I didn't have coworker connections. I didn't have friends in that community at that point. And that's what happens to people with disabilities a lot. They can live in a nice neighborhood. They can live in a nice home, but they may not be well connected. So how do you help somebody to really belong? When I think of relationships are the things that hold communities together. That's what makes home be part of what home is. It's the people that knock on your door, to call you, to write to you. All people want value and respect. People are respected for being citizens in their community. People are not respected for being clients of a service system. So as people become part of their communities, part of their owning their own homes, part of being the renters of the community, value and respect comes with that. So when I think of home it's a complicated piece, because there is a building that someone needs to be in, that they're satisfied with, but there has to be a lot of interconnections to make that a healthy place, a satisfying place, a place that was welcoming of friends, and where somebody can feel rich in terms of what their life has to offer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is talk about a life of my own, my home, my life, my happiness, and I'm going to go through a few stories. This first one is a person by the name of John. And John is a man that I got to know maybe about 18 years ago or so. And how I got to know him was through another gentleman that we support. And the other gentleman we support, actually, how I met him was that his mother was dying, and she was in the living room in a hospital bed, dying of cancer at that point. And I had been asked to come in to kind of sort through with this family what could happen. And this was early on when I first came to OCL. And the typical response back 20 years ago would have been to help this gentleman, Ron, to find a living situation that made sense for him. But he had two older sister and an older brother. They were both, off with their own lives. And what happened was that the mother was leaving the house in trust. And so the house was going to be left in trust for Ron. Okay, now Ron couldn't live there completely by himself. He didn't have probably the experience to do that. Mom had made a lot of decisions for him, because they had lived together all their lives. But when you started sorting through, Ron's life, he was very well connected in his community. The neighbors knew him. He was well connected in his church. He was part of co-coaching a Little League team. There was a lot of good things that said, well, why don't we just keep him here? Now, this was early on when we started working at OCL, but at that point, what happened was that the houses all had to be in agencies' names. And that didn't make sense to me because this was going to be Ron's home, Ron was going to continue to live there, and then we needed to figure out how to put supports around him. So we did this under very, very, very traditional funding, okay? So what happened was we figured out a staffing plan, for him to get a support. The family felt that Ron would be lonely. So this is where John came in. John was a person that one of our staff knew that might be a good match for Ron, okay? Because the family thought that their brother would be very lonely, and it would be good to have another person with a disability there. They also thought it would be good to have other income coming into the house so that when the roof needed repair or the stairs needed to be fixed or whatever needed to be done, there would be some extra income going into the trust account. So Ron and John end up moving into that location after Mom died. This is more the organizational change piece, but during that time, though, we couldn't get staffing unless it was certified, but they didn't certify it. Because Mom died, we decided we would just go ahead and staff it because he was in need. And at that point, it was about a year later, we were still getting paid for staffing the situation. It still was not certified because it was supposed to be certified. Finally, the state came through and said, it's only one person. We'll just ignore this. It's only one person. And that's kind of like the beginning of some organizational change stuff, but that's when it didn't make sense to put Ron's house in the agency's name. It made sense to keep it in Ron's name. Now, what happened with the two of them is that they were like the traveling salespeople. I'm sure you get them here. As traveling salespeople come by, and the traveling salespeople came by and sold Ron like a $3,000 vacuum cleaner. And so the family began being concerned about what was going on. Now, John's an interesting character, and John likes junk, okay? If you have any junk that's broken, if you bring it to John here, he can fix it. He can fix VCRs, he can fix TVs, he can fix DVD players. He just loves doing that stuff. So he collects people's junk. He fixes a lot of it, and then he tries to sell it back to other people. So that's what he does. Now, Ron was living in this really nice little community, and his brother and sister had lived there their whole life, and they're not used to having junk around, okay? They're also not used to having Ron making bad decisions. Another thing that he did is he started his kitchen on fire one day. Just because of the way he was cooking, okay? So they had concerns. So this guy down here, David actually used to work for our organization. And when he heard that these guys were having some trouble, he made the suggestion of, why don't I just move in with them? And this was like a 4-bedroom house. So yeah, that makes sense. Okay, why don't you just move in with them? So he moves in with them, and everything settles out pretty much. But over time, what happened is the family became more and more agitated with the way John does. John's also a smoker, and he's probably sitting on his porch right there smoking a cigarette. There's his ashtray in front of him. But the smoke was bothering the family, the junk was bothering the family. Finally, the family said, we don't want him here any longer, and we have a homeless person in the street. We tried it with another person called Don. These were the On brothers. There was Ron, Don, and John. But anyhow, same thing happened with Don, which is a whole nother story, but Don lived with him for a few years, and same sort of thing. Don's a ladies' man, you know, and he likes to flirt and do things like that, and the family just wasn't happy with that either, kicked him out, so we have another homeless person on the street. So now we're taking care of these homeless people that need services. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that David, well, Sigrid, let me just say, the person with David is Sigrid, and Sigrid used to be Ron's support, John's, Ron's, and Don's support person. And so she got to know David through, you know, going over to the house and supporting the guys. So what ends up happening, this little marital bliss in our agency, David and Sigrid end up getting married, okay? But then also, when John gets kicked out, what David did is he decided to move with John. So they eventually moved to another apartment. Then, to make the long story short, they moved a couple of times, but this is actually a firehouse that they live in right now. Sigrid and Dave ended up buying a firehouse, and it looked just like a firehouse, with the pole down the center and the bays for the fire trucks. It looked just like a firehouse. And so these guys all moved in together, you know. So there was an upper floor and a bottom floor. And so Sigrid and Dave were going to live upstairs, and of course Sigrid and Dave, you know, have done a little bit more work upstairs to make it more homey. But when I went downstairs and visited where John was going to be living, I just looked at everybody and saying, "We're getting federal money. What are you guys doing?" You know, it was just incredible. You know, it was a fire station. There was no doubt. It had a little tiny kitchen in the back, a little tiny bathroom off to the side, and this big vacant room that used to have fire trucks in. So, but the nice thing was, it worked for John. You know, and sometimes what I've had to do is back away from what I think is the right thing. It worked for John. It worked for his junk. It worked for the relationships he had. The three of them were just thrilled with fixing up this place. So all I did was ask him, you put a couple walls up here or there. You know, so they ended up putting up some walls, making a bedroom. And it still is a kind of a rough-looking place. But John's kind of a rough kind of guy. You know, and so it kind of matches what they do. John also, he's kind of well connected. He runs around and talks with people quite a bit, and he's met people down at the local pub. He knows people over at the church, which is right next door. He goes over every Sunday, brings coffee to the person who is, you know, doing the books for the church. He goes down to the local pub, and I don't know that he has any problems anymore with this, but he was going down to the local pub, and he had quite a bill, you know, because he was charging his drinks there, you know. And I remember getting a phone call from the bartender one time saying, "Your friend Ron's got quite a tab here. He owes, you know, $200 or whatever it was." And I said, "Why is that my problem?" You know, it's just like Ron's coming down there getting drinks. It's like, if I came in there, could I get a $200 tab? No. Then why are you giving, you know, John a $200 tab? You know, so eventually those guys kind of work those things out. But he's very, very well connected. And there was a really nice story, which I don't have on here. We've done some writing in our agency, and there was a story that Sigrid wrote a number of years ago. I was making staff and people we support write just little things about life. And they wrote a really nice story about a cat named Bogo. And it was a cat of John's. And John, he takes in pets all the time, you know, so he has all kinds of, you know, cats coming in and out of there, generally cats, sometimes a dog. There was one cat, though, that ended up getting hit by a car. And it was just a very sensitive story about what that meant to Sigrid and Dave and to John. in terms of the sorrow that they went through, in terms of the togetherness that they had, in terms of finding the pet, in terms of the little cross that John got up in the middle of the night and put on. And some of this stuff is what kind of melds people together. You know, it's like that's what melds these people, and these people have been together, I don't even know, probably 18 years, 20 years, they've known each other, something like that. So for John, his home is probably atypical for what I would want, but it seems to work for him. It seems to be a good place for all his junk and habits. It seems to be a place where he can feel connected and, you know, part of what his community is. And Dave and Sigrid have been real instrumental, you know, and they're just nice people. They're not paid. Neither one of them work for our agency any longer. They're just nice people that live upstairs, is what they are, and kind of keeping an eye on them. So this is Eric. Eric is a man that I met when his mother was also dying of cancer. And what happened was that I got invited to a planning, not a planning meeting, but a meeting at another agency. One of the coordinators, the service coordinator, worked for our agency, and she was saying that she didn't feel that people were really listening to what Eric really needed. And so I go to this meeting, and I met Mom for the first time. I did not know Eric at all. I knew Eric through conversations I'd had with the service coordinator, but I've never actually met the gentleman before. But anyhow, Mom was saying that her son, well, first of all, he's been living with her all of his life, and she's dying. I mean, she's going to probably be gone in the next year or so. And she's trying to desperately figure out what would be a reasonable life for him before she passes away. So she starts talking about where she lives, and she lives out in the country, and it's very peaceful out in the country. And Eric doesn't do well with city noises at all. He also doesn't do well when he's competing against other people with disabilities. You know, so she's seen him at different program types. The program types weren't working. You know, so, and then she also said he does better when he's with cool guys. So I remember those three things. The country was important, and city noises don't work, and the cool guy thing, okay? So now I'm sitting there, I have a state worker sitting there, it was a big group of people, and I have the director of another agency sitting there, and I whispered to the state worker, I said, why couldn't somebody just get him a place out in the country, and instead of you know, having other people with disabilities live with him, why couldn't we find maybe a couple of cool guys for him to live with? So he said, go ahead and say that. You know, so I said this at the meeting. I said, you know, from what you're saying, it sounds like maybe a countryside home, an individual home, you know, might be the best option. And then looking for some guys that, you know, Eric feels that are, you know, good people for him. And try not to do anything else with other people with disabilities. And the agency director that was there, she slammed her fist on the table and said, we don't do that kind of service. You don't know Eric. He's too risky. He's too vulnerable. It's not safe. And she's going on and on and on. So what she did is she offered a vacancy in a 4-person group home in the city that was available for him. You know, so, but at that point, what happened is the family, which the mother locked herself onto me as we left that meeting and said, do you really think this can happen? I said, I think anything can happen. I don't know your son, I've never met him, but you know, I'm listening to what you think, and if you have a vision for what your son needs, I don't know why we can't, you know, figure that out. You know, so what she did is she started inviting us over to her house, which was a beautiful, beautiful home out in the country, and she was an artist, and it was just, I mean, absolutely gorgeous. And we sat there, and we just planned and planned and planned and planned. Now, Eric is I hate to label people, but he has severe autism. He doesn't have a lot of communication skills. noises bother him a lot. The first time I met him, we went to a park, which we thought was peaceful, but there was a game in the background, and he just ended up latching on my hair and just would not let go. It was not his fault. It was just that we didn't understand, or I didn't understand, what bothered him at that time. There's times that he could stay with us. Many times he couldn't. But we always met at the house. The agency director of that other agency would not let her staff be part of these planning meetings during their work time. So what we did is we all met in the evenings. It was potluck dinners. It was very nice. And you know, throughout the planning, I mean, he is a very vulnerable man. There's no question about it. But Mom really believed that him living out in the country, him living with the cool guys, and him getting the proper support out there was the way to go. So we put together a proposal, and at that point, yeah, some of this stuff may not matter to you guys, but there's ways that we can certify homes and ways that we can do natural homes for people. So we have the option. When you do the natural home for people, it's not in the agency name at all, and there's more flexibility, and the state doesn't walk through your door. But when you do a certified home, what happens is that the state has authority over your home. It would actually be in our agency's name. And then you get a higher amount of money given to you for support services. So when I talked with Mom about what to do, he was going to be costly. So if we did the uncertified way, it's not that we couldn't do it, but it was going to take some time to get the approvals. And what I wanted to do was to get this up and running before Mom died. You know, so we went the certified way, and he ended up getting the funding very quickly. He ended up moving. He moved in with two cool guys. They lived there together for a number of years, and he's had some changes since that time, but he's still living in the same place. Mom helped us to find a home, which was not too far from hers, way out in the country. And I mean, he is, I mean, he's living the life that Mom wanted, and Mom died probably maybe 2 months after he moved. So I think it's hard for me to talk about them, but anyhow, I think she just wanted to see her son at peace. So, and the nice thing is, he's still living in the same place. He's still got the same support systems. He has a lot of personal care coming through. He has a lot of, and he has one-to-one support in terms of what he does for his work. In terms of where he lives in the countryside, like I said, but the landlords live on the property, but in the house behind him. And the landlords have developed a wonderful relationship with him. Just a really nice relationship over time. So that's Eric. And this is Ben. Ben is a man that I've known since he was a kid. His father was one of my professors in college. And that community that I went to college in, I was telling you that I graduated from there. I left and then I came back. And I worked for an agency that supported people with intellectual disabilities. And actually the father was on the board of directors for our agency. You know, so his name was Bob. So I knew of I knew of Ben through Bob, but I'd never met him before. And he kept saying, "You will never be able to support my son. You will never be able to." You know, and so, you know, and I'm working at that agency at that point, and he was too young at that point for us to support. So periodically, though, what would happen is Dad would come up to the office, and Ben might be with him. And so Ben would come in my office sometimes if the dad needed some support, and he would hang out at my computer, and he would do things on the computer. You know, so that's about all that I knew about Ben. Never met his wife either. His wife is Sue, and Ben's a black man, Bob's a white guy, and I just assumed his wife was black. Always did. What I found out a number of years later, they adopted Ben. And Sue and Bob adopted biracial children is what they did, but I didn't know anything about their family. So it was kind of interesting. You get a picture of what people look like, and then you're kind of surprised when they're not who you think they are at that point. So that's kind of what happened with them. But anyhow, I worked at that agency for about 11 or 12 years, and then I eventually came up to OCL. And when I came to OCL, what happened was Bob ended up wishing me good luck, but he said he would keep away, in terms of not being part of that system, because he wanted me to, develop whatever it was that I was developing there. About a year after I was there, we approached Bob, and Bob came on the board of directors of OCL. So Bob has been with me for my whole adult life. But Ben also grew up, and so Ben was getting to be, he was getting towards leaving school at that time. And the family was beginning to think with Ben, and Ben uses some facilitated communication, typically with his mom, not with a lot of other people, but he began to facilitate with Mom, you need to kick me out, okay? And Mom was not thinking like it was time for Ben to leave. Ben and Bob and Sue live on this wonderful lake, and actually this is at Bob's and Sue's house, and so this is the lake in front of Bob and Sue's house, and Ben loves the water. He just absolutely loves the water. And Bob had bought two houses that were real close side by side. They were two smaller houses, and what he had done over the years is he had combined the two houses into one big house. So he had used a lot of saws and I don't know, what gizmos, whatever, wood things, to build, these two buildings back together. And during that time, Ben would help. Ben would help do stuff with his father. So at that point, they were talking about whatever, Ben was going to want. Now, Sue was thinking, eventually they'll buy the house next door to that. Those people were retiring, soon. Sooner or later, they'd sell that house, and she thought the idea would be for him to move over there. They'd have a happy little family existence, and life would go on. Well, Ben didn't have that idea at all. Ben wanted to move up to Syracuse. He had gone to school at Jewonio, which was up in the Syracuse area, and he wanted to live up in the Syracuse University area, which was completely different than what Mom and Dad thought. So we had a planning party, or they had a planning party, and they're both college professors, Sue and Bob, and they invited all kinds of good-thinking people to be there, all people that knew them as a family. So it was a really, really nice gathering of people, and the daughter ended up facilitating or one of her daughters ended up facilitating the discussions. And at the end of that meeting, it was pretty clear that Ben did not want to live with Mom and Dad any longer. The reason for that is because he had two other sisters that were older, and he saw his sisters leave in their young 20s. They went to college, they got their own apartments, they did things. And so he was getting to be that age, so he felt that this is when he should leave also. So they ended up, originally, they found, let me move back. There was Granddad. Granddad was living with them. Granddad had Alzheimer's. That was Bob's father. And Granddad and Ben were not getting along very well at all. Granddad did not like Ben. Ben did not like Granddad. Granddad eventually died, left money to the family, and what the family did is use the money that Granddad left and help to Ben purchase a house up in the university area. So this was up in the area that Ben wanted to be at. He needed support. He had never once spent a night alone without Mom and Dad, never. And Mom and Dad did not think it was possible at all. So he needed support, and this was a number of years ago. We were going through an election, and I think it was Democratic at that point, and the Republicans were coming in, and she was really worried about what the Republicans were going to do with the funding. So she asked me, what is the amount of money that we can get locally without having to go to the state for approval? So at that point, it was $23,000 a year. So she said, that's what I need to know. We're going to do this on $23,000 a year then. So we ended up, figuring out with the family. what kind of support system that they wanted. They elected to advertise in the paper for people to live with Ben. And these would be people that would not be paid in any way, that would be hopefully good souls, that would get to know Ben, that could reside there. And so Jesse and Daryl applied along with some other people, but Jesse and Daryl were friends. And Sue put the ad in with Ben. Sue and Ben advertised, Sue and Ben interviewed, and Sue and Ben decided on who was going to live there. And Daryl and Jesse, they lived there for several years. Well, let me move back. Sue's idea was that Ben, or Daryl and Jesse would move in first, get things settled. Once things were settled and everybody felt comfortable, Ben would go in and, do some trial stays, that sort of thing to get used to it. Ben had nothing to do with that. He said, Daryl and Jesse are moving in, I'm moving in too. So they all moved in together, So, and the great thing that happened with that, Daryl ended up moving out of state at one point, so he left. But Jesse ended up staying there for 12 years. He had a really nice relationship with Ben. Jesse eventually had a girlfriend. They had twins. They all lived there together. It was just an interesting arrangement. But then the family also was deeply, deeply, deeply involved. And one of the important things in Ben's life is work. And one of the things that was important to him was to have something meaningful. And when Sue began to talk with him about what it is that he wanted, what he was, and he tried different things. He worked at like a food bank. I mean, there was a variety of different things that he tried. They also went to the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency to see if they could get funding for him, and they said he was too disabled for their funding. They went to the Independent Living Center. The Independent Living Center said he was too problematic for what they would be able to do. I mean, they were getting knocked down again and again and again. What Ben finally said he wanted to do is he wanted to work with power tools, okay? And Sue's thinking painting, something a little less. But it made sense when you think about it, because he's helped his father. Because while he lived there also, he started dismantling things at the house. Like he had seen how they were put together, so he started taking them apart. So he had this, love for taking tools and building and taking things apart. So early on, what happened at this particular house, they couldn't get the vocational agency to fund anything. So Dad said, we're going to bring some of our tools over to Ben's basement. And they started making birdhouses is what they did. So they started making birdhouses. They sold them at the local farmers markets and that sort of thing. Dad helped Ben to design it. Dad came over and helped, put the birdhouses together. So the family was deeply, deeply involved in the support for Ben, and it's because they wanted to do it for $23,000 a year. So I think Ben got something like 15 hours of support a week, and that was it. But anyhow, some of these stories are long, but what happened that eventually Jesse moved, another person by the name of Matt moved in, and Matt had animals. He had reptiles. And there's pictures of me with snakes, but not here. But there's pictures of me with snakes on me and stuff. That's what he liked. He liked are they called cold-blooded? Slimy things. So he had all that. But also at the house, what they also had was a couple of cats. And what happened one time is that cat jumps up on top of a container because these reptiles need lights to keep warm. Cat jumps up on top of one of these, the light fell down, hit the curtain got hot, house starts on fire. Okay, the nice thing was everybody was, got out. Nobody was hurt. I think all the reptiles and everything got out too, so everybody got out. But the house had a lot of damage to it, a lot of smoke damage in the living room and another room. But at that point, Ben said, I don't want to go back there. He ended up going to an apartment complex at one point during this because he couldn't live in his home, which drove him crazy. Because Ben, he'll say he's quirky. That's his words. He's quirky. And his quirkiness bothers other people. And he can't stop his quirkiness. And so he's at this apartment complex. He's trying to figure out how to live there effectively with Matt. But it's just not working. It's just not working at all. And it's causing Ben a lot of angst because he knows that he's bothering people, but he can't stop from bothering people. So what ends up happening is Ben goes back to live with Mom and Dad. Matt goes to live with whoever he lived with. And they continued to live, or Ben continued to live with Mom and Dad, and we still had support that came in to pick him up to do whatever he wanted to do, but we just did it at his home because money's attached to him, not to the building. And then they said it's not going to work. He doesn't want to go back there. So insurance paid for the damage. They put it up for sale. They sold it, and then I don't know what I have on here. This is the house right here. This is a house that was built for Ben on some of the land that they had. So Ben now lives out in the country. This particular house, like I said, was built for him. On the side over here, there's a barn over there, and that barn used to have horses and stuff. It actually has horses in now, but that for a while was his studio. Because he's got a bigger woodworking business, which I'll show you. And then over on this side over here, there's another building, which I have pictures of some of that. That's where his workshop is, okay? Ben loves water. I don't remember. Yep, Ben loves water. So he has, I don't know if this is a thing. Yes, it is, okay. So he has a hot tub right there. Water is very important to him. He has an above-ground swimming pool. And that pond over here, his sister and brother-in-law actually own a backhoe, or whatever they call it, and they dug that pond for him because they know how important water is. And up in his bedroom, he has a huge bathtub with like a whirlpool in it. He loves water, okay? And that was very important when they were developing this home for Ben. For Ben to be out in the country without any water wasn't going to work for Ben at all, so he needed water. This is just his backyard, just what he looks at every day. This is his workshop. This was built specifically for his woodworking business. Now, it's interesting because over time he got bored. He got very bored doing the birdhouses. So he started doing tables. He moved into some benches. He's done spice racks, and now he's doing like dining room tables and chairs. So he's expanded his repertoire over time. It's interesting because we do have a person who works for him. This is his workshop, by the way. So he comes, he's not like a 9-to-5 worker. He works when it hits him. It's like maybe 3 hours a day or something like that, in between being in the water, in between walking, in between a lot of different things. And he has orders for furniture. Actually, I have a couple pieces in my house. We have a couple pieces at the agency, but he gets orders for furniture. He's sold furniture at farm markets or crafting places. He loves, his favorite thing is sanding. He has the smoothest wood anywhere, okay? They start with raw wood also. So they buy logs, and then they make the boards out of the woods. But anyhow, there's a person that His name is Angelo, and Angelo is actually the person who had been supporting him. He hasn't been doing it for about a year now. This is the guy Matt, but Angelo was with Ben for, I don't know, 8 years or something like that. And it's interesting because we do have money to provide support for him for his business, and we use a traditional funding stream to get that money, and it wasn't from the vocational agency. So we used it through another part of the waiver. But it is called DAHAB, not that it makes any difference. But this DAHAB funding stream usually funds people to go into what I would call, this is Jeff Strelly's term, day wasting programs, where people come together and waste their time and waste their days, okay? So that's how usually the DAHAB money is used. But what we were able to do is twist the DAHAB money so that Ben could hire a craftsman to work with him. So it's interesting when you advertise for what you need. I mean, for us to, and you see in the newspaper constantly, you know, people advertising for residential workers, day support workers, whatever it is. And if we hired a day support worker, it would have been of no use to Ben at all. So what they ended up doing is putting an ad in the paper saying that, you know, I'm a man that's, you know, I build furniture. I have my own workshop, and I'm looking for a skilled craftsman to work with me in my business, and typical of Ben, and don't mind me for my quirkiness, you know, that sort of thing. So, so this guy, Angelo, ended up applying, and Angelo, I mean, some of the gizmos in this place were actually Angelo's, you know, pieces also, because he figured, you know, that Ben has a better workshop. They could work together on things. So Angelo and Ben have been working together on a lot. And Angelo is a sculptor. And I don't have pictures of a lot of this stuff, but actually on the DVD, if it works, the YouTube, I should say, if that works, if I'm able to show it, you'll meet Angelo and that sort of thing. But when I think about home for Ben, I mean, Ben's home is so interconnected. It's like a spider web of stuff that has to be there. It just has to be there. You know, he needs that water. Okay, so you have to figure out water in 154 ways. He needs his power tools. He needs his work. He needs, for him to go off to, I don't know where, but to go off to a workshop every day isn't going to work for him. He needs to go in and out, in and out, in and out, fix this, work on that, sand this, you know, put this together. He needs to go at his own pace. Even with going at its own pace, which is not a typical, you know, 9-to-5 job, he still is producing quality stuff, you know, and so you just got to do it in the way that works well for Ben. The right people are critical in this man's life. We've had people with him before that just did not work at all. And caused a lot of angst in his life, you know, and so, and actually, the nice thing, I'm not sure, there's a couple of YouTube videos, so I'm not sure what this one shows, but moving back, Sue said that he had never spent a night alone in his house before, or without her before, you know, and then he starts moving in with these guys, you know, that are unpaid people, that they develop a nice relationship, and I mean, funny things happen too early on. I mean, one time, he's up at the university area. I mean, there's houses all over the place, and this is early on. He left his apartment early in the morning, and Jesse and Daryl didn't know where he was. No idea where he was. What he had done is he had gone down the street, opened a door, found a shower, and was taking a shower in somebody else's house. You know, so he was getting to know his neighbors. You know, so, but anyhow. But now, the interesting thing is, the family has really listened to Ben, and Ben has taken time to figure out who he is as a man and what he can comfortably do and not do. And if I asked him 2 years ago, do you think you could spend a night by yourself? He'd say, no, can't, nope. But today, he lives there by himself. He has nobody that he lives with. What he has is there's a house next door that his sister and brother-in-law live in. So he's got support people near him. But nobody stays the night with him any longer. Family has talked with me also about the idea of maybe not having federal funding for anything for him any longer, because he's developed a nice set of relationships with the neighbors, obviously with the sister and brother-in-law. He has regular work that he's doing at this point. His business may be able to hire somebody. So 5 years from now, I may be here saying, this is not a person that we support at all any longer. It's just a person that his life got together and, it's moving in the way that they want it. So, all right, so that's Ben. And that's just Ben being happy. I mean, he's a handsome, handsome man. And that's him sitting on his porch. So what I want to do is talk about the importance of families, friends, neighbors, connections, and supports. So that's 4 people that you've met in our agency at this point. And when I think about what home is for each one of those people, it's entirely different. For Ben to live how John lives would not work. For John to live how Ben works would not work. For Colin to live like whoever. I mean, everybody's life is completely different. Everyone's home's completely different. There's no rules. There's no rules for anything. People develop their own homes, their own lifestyles. All we ask is that you meet law requirements. You meet healthy and safety requirements. But you can choose how to set up your home. You can choose how to live your life. Okay, look at this. We've got YouTube with Ben. Okay, thank you. So that YouTube was actually made by Angelo. Angelo was the guy with the dark hair that does the support for Ben with his woodworking.